to firstly begin with a bakashat mechila and actually connect my ihur to the shiur. And you'll see how we're going to do this. And as we get started right now, I'm just waiting to see a few more faces over here. I see Lorraine, Hindi, Esther, Eti, Tali, Rosalind, Kolakavod. Okay, thank you, Eti, for putting on your camera. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to get started with different tefillot in Tanakh. And as I mentioned, there are official tefillot where we're actually going to find the verb bayitpalel or batitpalel. And then there are the unofficial tefillot, wherein we're going to see how Chazal will extrapolate from these tefillot. Many different ideas have become incorporated in our tefillah. But I'm going to begin, not necessarily in chronological order, in which case one could really turn to how the Midrashim see both Adam, Cain, they're crying out to Hashem, different ways of appreciating according to Chazal. Adam Harishon opens up with Mizmor Shir, Liyom HaShabbat. So we're not necessarily going to address those. Rather, we're really going to focus much more on explicit tefillot in Tanakh. And in doing so, extrapolate, as we said, different ideas that we're going to see incorporated in our own tefillah. So we're going to begin, as you see, with Tfilat Abraham, both because we're entering the stories of Avraham Avinu this week, Parshat Lech Lecha, but also because this is a perfect segue from last week's shiur, when we spoke about the etymology of the word tefillah as palal. And we said that that's some form of judgment, some form of introspection, right? Some form even of recognizing an internal dialectic that we share with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what we're going to basically prove today from Tanakh, before we see some of the halachic obligatory aspects of tefillah, is what is it supposed to express. So particularly by Avraham Avinu, this was one of the sources that we use to recognize what the word tefillah is even all about. We're going to start then with a Sipur Abraham, and we're going to see how there's so much that we learn from the Tefillot of Abraham. So I'm going to go backwards just for a moment because we saw this source last week. If you remember, Breshit Parachat Psukim Gimel Tzayin. Again, this is the first source on your sheets where we saw that Abraham and Sarah, this is Abraham and Sarah, not in Parshat Lech Lecha, but in Parshat Vayera. The second time there's a famine, Abraham doesn't go as far down as Mitzrayim. Rather, he stays within the borders of Eretz Yisrael. He goes to the southern area of the Negev, to the area of Gerar. And if you recall there, once again, he says that Sarah is Achutihi, and they take Sarah to Abimelech. Vayavo Elokim al Abimelech b'chalom halayla, vayomer lo, hincha met al haisha asher lakachta. You're going to die because you took this woman. Hibulat Baal, actually she's married. Abimelech lo karabe laha, but Abimelech, and two different ways of reading this pasuk, either Abimelech did not go near her or Abimelech had not gone near her. Vayomer Adoni Hagoy Gam Tzadik Taharog. And especially with that second explanation, Abimelech turns to God and says, wait a second, God, I'm really innocent. You're going to kill even a tzaddik. I've been such a tzaddik. I haven't touched her. Hello, Marli Achutihi. Not only that, this is, the typical Avimelech response. He always gives numerous excuses. He says he also said that she was his sister. Gam hi amra achihu. And she also said, this is my brother, even though we don't find this part recorded at all. Who betam hi amra achihu betam levavi umin kayona kapi asiti zot. And therefore, I'm Mr. Innocent, right? I did this completely out of naivete, completely out of innocence. So notice, as Hashem says, I also know that you didn't do anything wrong. Basically, you did this with tom lev. And therefore, and I am sparing you an opportunity from sin, meaning had I not come to you tonight, then chances are you would have eventually done something to this woman. So I'm sparing you, and that's why I'm not hurting you. And then Hashem says that Avraham Avinu, as a matter of fact, is going to pray on his behalf, and then you will live. But if you do not return, Sarah, so now it's time to return her. And not only that, but this same man is going to be mitpalel ba'atcha. So this is really And one of the first times that we actually find the source of tefillah, we discussed this last week, in which case, what's vayitpalel betnech? He's going to zap, and basically he's going to undergo a certain process of introspection. He is going to be your defense attorney. But first, vayitpalel betnech, we said that the difference here is very evident as opposed to recognizing in Mitzrayim that he's an Ish Elokim, that he's this man of God. Tefillah is going to be a much more personal activity. Vayitpalel betnech. So Rashi says, what does it mean? Vayitpalel betnech. Because he's a Navi. Does that mean only a Navi, only a prophet has a power of prayer? What does that mean, Navihu? No. Navihu, biyodea shelo nagata ba. And this really dovetails beautifully with the explanation of tefillah. Why can he undergo this introspection for you? Because he's a Navi, and he'll want to intercede on your behalf by virtue of the fact that he knows, because he's a prophet, that you didn't touch her. Therefore, he can undergo this introspection. Right? Basically, he's going to serve, and we're going to note also the development of the art of tefillah, that not everyone during this time period knows how to approach God, giving us a sense. Do you think everyone can?
Because we were talking about it before. How come Noah didn't answer God?
Noah beautiful.
Was the only one talking.
Right?
God was talking to Noah, but nothing.
There's no tefillah.
No connection.
Video. So Chazal, as you know, criticize Noah, right? And say that Noah, tzadika tamimaya b'dorotav, what made him different than Avraham Avinu, right? I'm sure you've had this whole discussion.
We had this whole discussion because he gets a tremendous introduction. And בסופו של דבר הוא איש אדמה.
בדיוק, בסופו של דבר, נכון? Meaning you see it more post facto. But we were saying, and you shouldn't. That's exactly it. And now the question is, what does that mean, this whole hypothetical? If he was in the door of Abraham, by the way, he was in the door of Abraham, right? Abraham was born while he was still alive. And also he is in the door. And that's exactly it. Meaning it seems very clear, but then we don't hear about him. Sarah just said, right? The story of the Kerem and the Isha Dama tells you about him. Then in the end, he is a very righteous individual, but he's a very passive individual. He could have had a greater effect on the entire door, and he doesn't. How could he have had an effect on the entire door? So the Midrashim say when people stopped him, he could have used that as an opportunity for outreach, for kiruv. But the most basic difference is, what doesn't he do? We're going to see this right now. He doesn't daven for them.
But maybe he didn't know that he could.
Thank you.
He was afraid.
Beautiful.
What happened to them
beautiful. That's the response. Traumatized after. But how about before? Why doesn't he daven before? So chances are.
What happened to Adam Rishon that had a good connection?
So let me ask you: Do you think Adam davens?
He had a connection with God. He answered back.
What's tefillah? So on the most basic level, do they talk to God?
Yeah.
Does Noah talk to God?
I don't know.
No, Noah does not talk to God. There is no dialogue between Noah and God.
I'm sure. Not only that, but do you think even these Anshe Hamas and the, in the Tanakh sense of the word, do you think that, I don't know, they converse with God? So it says that, there are other gods. Enosh, is recognizing Shem Hashem. I'm sure they're talking, meaning what's missing? You said it yourself. What's missing?
Tefillah.
There's communication. Becky's saying.
I'm saying that the only dialogue we ever hear about Noah and God is when Noah doesn't want to, doesn't know how to bring the animals in.
Okay, Becky, try it again.
I said the only dialogue we ever see between Noah and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is when he doesn't know how to bring the animals in. And God said, don't worry about it, I'll bring them to you.
That's a midrash.
That's a midrash.
Again, midrash. Okay, but that's the only dialogue that we can ever...
But I like that. But Becky, I'm so happy you quoted that midrash, because basically the midrash is saying, of course he communicated with God. Everyone was communicating with God. What we're going to see, and that's why you're all on these shiurim, is that there actually is an art of tefillah. Not everyone knows how to daven. By the way, what's the proof? These psukim that we're learning right now. What does that mean? Vayitpalel betnech ki navihu. Why can't Avimelech daven for himself? Right? Undergo self-introspection. Why does Abraham have to daven for him? And the answer is, only certain people have already learned how to pray, which we're going to see is really how to judge, right?
Shania?
How to connect through judgment. Yes, Hinti. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hashem, so great to see you.
Thank you. You know what? It makes me, when you think about Parshat, Lech Lecha, and you talk about the whole concept of, did he daven? Did he not daven? Not to go off like on a tangent, but like when you think also a little bit later, when we talk about Sarah and that she can't have a child, when we think about Rivka, when we think about Rachel, it talks very much about the fact that she davened. But we know that for Sarah, she didn't. It never talks about the fact that she davened for it. Like we know she couldn't have, but that also is like a quiet thing. And the question is why from the first person that we see it from that couldn't have a child, and it's obvious, and we know that she gave birth so late, we also don't see it.
I am so happy you said that because that's next week's shiur. How did you know that? Meaning, that's exactly how I wanted to end off today. Meaning, what? You don't think Abraham davened for a child? Right? So much so that there are midrashim that say that Sarah had to do what she did with Hagar, says, because you didn't daven enough for me. But even that means that Abraham davens, but we don't hear about that tefillah, number one. And number two, maybe he didn't know the art of tefillah for a child. Who's the first one by whom we don't see the word by Yipalil, but a different word, by that the Torah actually attests to the fact that he did something to have a child.
Yitzchak and Rivka, they both stood at different corners.
Vayater Yitzchak nochach ishto. That's after Shat li Elokim. That's a thank you, but not a tefillah, not a bakasha. Right, not a judgment, right? That's a post facto. So yes, but that's what's so strange. Avram can daven for someone else's child, but not for his own. So Hinta, you're asking exactly the right question. That's the first question with which I was going to start next week. Wait, here Avram is davening all over the place. No mention. And you're right, no mention of Sarai or Sarah davening. By the way, no mention of Rivka davening. No mention of Rachel, Leah davening. Now, Chazal say, did they all daven? No. Yes. So why don't we hear about it? Why don't we hear about their tefillah? What is
but we do hear that Yitzchak davened for Rivka, and also we hear that there was the argument
only one.
With Yaakov and Rachel also, right? But here nothing.
Tefillah. Exactly, but no tefillah. So we're going to have to take a look very, very carefully next week at what this Vayatar Yitzchak and what's going on with regard to tefillot for children. Yafeh ma'od. And we're going to try to stick to Torah, even though we're going to see this in the Nevi'im and Ketuvim as well. If I would ask you then, remember we saw last week a few people who actually are going to daven. So Abraham, Yitzchak, do you find Yaakov davening? I'm just putting these questions in,
Yes.
I thought you find
not for a child.
Is that doesn't say by Yipalel, it says by Yador Yaakov, right? That's a neder. So it's a connection. So that's exactly So that's exactly it. Meaning a lot of people are connecting. Noach's connecting. A lot of people are connecting.
But Shani, Noach is connecting differently. Because in every other case, Abraham, Yitzchak, Moshe, they had a connection with the Kodesh Baruch Hu before that. In other words, that tefillah was not their first connection. With Noach, I'm not sure he even understood what his position was. And I don't think anybody had a right to interfere until afterwards the Midrash said, why did you do this? And God said, where were you all these 120 years?
I think the Midrash is very critical of Noach.
Very critical. But I think part of the problem was that Noach didn't have any kind of a dialogue with God before that. In other words, he didn't know what his position was, circa God.
Yafeh. Or even if he did, the Torah doesn't tell us about any dialogue. And that's the question, right? Why don't we hear? I'm sure Yaakov is davening. Why don't we hear about it? Right? And we're not going to hear about tefillah again until who's actually going to teach us that there is an art of tefillah, right? On one hand, we think, tefillah is the most natural expression. But Becky's pointing out, and Laura's pointing out, people are communicating, but not necessarily through this more introspective form called tefillah.
So then you have to get to Chana.
No, then you have to get to Moshe.
Moshe, okay.
We have to get to Moshe. So we're going to spend a lot of time on Moshe. So again, and we'll see the development even of Tefillah by Moshe. But let's take a look. So Rashi says that Avram is going to intercede because he knows that you deserve it, basically, right? You didn't do anything wrong. Take a look at the Rashbam, right? Rashi's grandson. The Rashbam says, Lashon mitzvatayim. Why is Avram going to daven? Because Ragilatzli umedaber et varai.
Right.
I have the chills every time I think about these words, which teaches us it's not just communication. I'm sure Abimelech was screaming and crying to Hashem. And yet Hashem, the Rashbam says, Avram understood the art of, he knew how to talk. He knew what tefillah was, which we already said last week, is something much more introspective. Rani ohiv et varav v'shomea tfilato. In other words, a lot of people can daven, but I'm not necessarily going to listen. Avram knows how to talk. He knows how to talk. That's what it means. Navi, not prophesy. He doesn't have a crystal ball in his head or anything. Rather, he has nivsbatayim. He knows the art of prayer. Isn't this beautiful?
Beautiful.
Now, why does the Rashbam say this? Avram knows how to daven. So it's clear because Hashem, how do you know that Hashem loves when Avram speaks?
Because he listens.
Okay, so Bella says because he listens. Any other ideas? You can look.
שאני בוויכוח על סדום.
כל הכבוד, טלי, כל הכבוד. And we're going to see.
ולעומתו בעצם משה רבנו היה מאוד תמציתי בתפילה שלו למרים.
אנחנו נצטרך לראות את כל ההתפתחות של תפילה אצל משה. It seems to get shorter, and not longer. אנחנו נדבר על זה. But in the meantime, Tali is 100% right. The Rashbam knows that Hashem loves hearing Abraham speak. And I'm going to qualify what Bella just said. Bella said because Hashem listens to Abraham.
And he responds.
And he responds. Yepe, responds, yes. Does Hashem always listen?
Yeah.
Really?
No.
Hashem, or answer. Hashem listens. Not in the conventional. Meaning, did Hashem give Abraham a positive answer by stone? No. So we're going to talk about this right now. And he was very engaged. In other words, we're going to see right now why the Rashbam says Hashem loves when Abraham talks. He may not do what Abraham says, but Hashem loves when Abraham talks.
You have a lot of children, and some children talk to you and you listen, and some children you listen, but you're like,
okay, yeah. And what happens at the end? You may not do what they ask, but what did you do? Which shows them what? That there's a relationship, and that they can come back to you tomorrow and ask for something else, and you may actually say yes. They're going to see something phenomenal in this tefillah. Take a look. Now again, the word tefillah isn't used, but we're going to see that that's the proof that Abraham knows how to daven, because he comes to Hashem after Hashem says, "Oh, by the way, you're going to have a child, and I'm going to destroy the people of Sodom." He says, "Really? And everyone just look at these words for a minute. And this is Avram talking to God. What does Avram say?
It's not fair.
Hashem, it's not fair. And you can't do this, right? Chalila lacha. It's a terrible desecration of your name.
Upside down. I don't know why.
He says, we would call this very chutzpahdik terminology. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Avram is turning to God with what argument? Atashofet. And I don't think this is really mishpat. Bidyuk. I don't think, at least in my eyes, God, it doesn't seem like mishpat.
But that's what I'm asking. It's really, he's saying it's not fair. It's a little mishpat. He couldn't say it about his wife. It's not fair.
Yeah, fair. So that's
nachon. My wife may not be, but maybe my wife.
So Bella and Hindi are going to start our shir next week exactly with that question. What, he couldn't say this for his wife? He couldn't say this. By the way, Parshanim asked us, he couldn't say this by the Akedah. Hashem, really? Come on, I have one child now. Really? So where are those tefillot? So we're going to talk about this. But clearly, what's the context that Abraham is bringing this in? This is the source that Abraham knows how to daven. What is tefillah? Why did last week's shir have to come? Tefillah is mishpat. Abraham says, okay, I'm undergoing introspection right now. And what do I see? I'm doing some judgment in my head, and this doesn't match up, right? Meaning, if there are 50 tzaddikim, you should not destroy the city. And Hashem says, okay, okay, 50 tzaddikim, fine, Avram, you're right. That's not justice. I agreed to your tefillah, to your sense of justice, and I won't destroy it. Then Avram himself says, he says, okay, God, I'm going to push you a little further on this, meaning Avram realizes he's being a little chutzpahdik, right? It's like asking, asking your boss at job, can I have next Friday off because it's my son's bar mitzvah? Sure, you can have Friday off. You know what? How about Thursday? That's exactly it. Meaning daikvar, right? Or maybe Wednesday night, I have to pick up my parents from the airport. Meaning yesh kabul. And yet he keeps going. Yes, it's same that I've stayed here even, meaning by El Moshe, same, right? I'm pushing you, I'm tenacious. That's the word.
Sonny, I think one of the reasons why Avram is able to go on is because even though he says Sofet Ata, Hashem answers him in Hashem and not Elokim. In other words, he sees the relationship, and that's why he can go on. It's like a child who, sees the parent softening so he can go on in his drishot. But if it would come to him in Elokim, he may not have felt that way.
Very nice. But bottom line, his real encouragement is mishpat, right? He says, okay, this is really about mishpat. In which case we understand, even without the word tefillah, that he's really engaged in tefillah over here. Hashem says, okay, arba'im chamisha. Okay, well, it's arba'im chamisha, but arba'im, is that still okay? And again, Avram keeps saying, Vayan Abraham, by Yomer, he ends up with 10, as you know, 10 tzadikim ba'ir. Hinena ho'alti ledaber Adonai, slicha, v'anochi afar va'iter. He says, Hashem, I know I was very tenacious. I put you on this, and I'm no one. Okay, but why did Hashem, so what do we see? That's the basis of the Rashbam to say, why did Hashem allow Avram to continue? He knew that there aren't going to be 10 tzaddikim ba'ir. So why does Hashem allow it? Because he loves this discussion. He loves that. What does it mean? Not just that Avram knows what words to use. What does it mean that Hashem loves Avram's expressions? What expression is there here? What does Hashem love about Abraham talking here?
שני, זה בעצם, אנחנו יודעים שלוקים היו תפילתם של צדיקים, ולכן הוא גרם לעקרות לשרה, רבקה ורחל, אבל פה זה פעם ראשונה שאנחנו שומעים על גבר שלוקים את התפילה שלו ועושה איזה משהו של עקרות. זו תפילה של גבר שהשם אוהב, לעומת תפילה של נשים שהשם אוהב.
אוקיי.
אנחנו יודעים על חנה, גם חנה השם עשה אותה עקרה, גם עם חנה אנחנו יודעים שלוקים עשה אותה עקר אותה כדי שהיא תתפלל, גם רחל, גם כאילו כולן, לעומת פעם ראשונה בעצם שאברהם מתפלל על עקרות, והשם בא אומר שהוא אוהב את התפילה שלו.
נכון, אבל כאן הוא לא מתפלל על עקרות, על מה הוא מתפלל כאן? בסדום.
על אנשי סדום, אבל הוא יודע...
על מה?
לא על אנשי סדום, הוא מדבר על אבימלך, הוא אומר לאבימלך, תגיד לאברהם שיתפלל, כי אבימלך היה עקר בעצם, אז הוא אומר, אני רוצה את התפילה של אברהם, הוא בעצם צריך להתפלל על עקרות.
אוקיי. יפה, אבל הרשב"ם אומר שהבסיס, למרות שאת צודקת, שהשם אוהב את התפילה הזו, על עקרות נוכל להגיד, but what's the basis? The first time that we hear Abraham's tefillah is in this context. Again, I went backwards to stone. Chesed? Chesed?
לא, הגינות, אתה לא תעשה משהו שלא נכון.
Excellent. Hindi has her hand up. Yes, Hindi?
It's also really seeing other people. It's not about him. None of this has anything to do about him. He's crying out, like even with Avimelech, there's also a connection. It is Sarah's involvement in it, but he's also davening for somebody else. Like he's not seeing himself in the whole picture.
Beautiful. Everyone see this?
He says,
everyone see this? The first tefillah that Abram offers, that's how he says, about is really for, at the first time we found the word was for Avimelech, not even for himself. And you're wondering, where's your tefillah for you? I don't know. But what we do know is that tefillah then goes beyond the self. And how does the Rashbam know that Hashem loves Abram's tefillah and that Abram loves Avimelech? Because he
continue.
He did that for
אבל גם אברהם לכאורה מביא נקודות שאלוקים לא חשב עליהם בסדום. אלוקים לא ידע.
He understands why does Hashem, Hashem explains why do I want to kill the people of Sodom? It says it in the Torah. So what's Abram asking for? No, he doesn't see it as mishpat. If there are 50 tzaddikim, then it's not mishpat. If there are 45, right, chutzpahdik, and the answer is going to say, even if there are 10, I still think that that's mishpat. I think that that's hagul. If there are 10 tzaddikim, and Achaz, I'll explain, because he says they're betach ha'ir she'em yicholim lahashpia, they could influence everyone else, right? Remember this? And that's really what we see is number one, what Hinzi said, that isn't that interesting? That every time we're going to see any term of tefillah, it's going to be about someone else. Even Yitzchak next week, it's Vayatzer Yitzchak for whom? Nochach Ishto. But it's not really, he can always do something like take another wife. Right? Meaning it's about someone else, which is a remarkable idea. We're going to see Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not about him. Hashem says, I'll start the new nation from you. No. Davening for someone else. His sister, Kelna Rafanallah. Tfilah is exactly the opposite of what we thought Tfilah was. I thought Tfilah is, right, introspection, and then I pray for me. It's introspection, but not necessarily for me. You see this? Broader issues.
You need something.
Right? Right? Everything is going to be for everyone, right? For someone else. But still, you
have to pray for your own children.
So we're going to talk about where do we get this idea that we can pray for ourselves. Now we have to see what...
אבל דווקא את התפילה של חנה שהתפללה על עצמה, משם אנחנו לומדים הלכות תפילה. לא מאברהם שהתפלל על האחר.
יפה, that's why, Talia Tzodeket, we're taking this step by step, right? We're not even in תקופת שופטים yet, right? Where זה חלק מכל העניין של השיעור, להבין התפתחות של התפילה דרך התנ"ך. What's the Tanakh teaching us about תפילה? Because maybe Noah didn't have the same sense of Plilut, right, of judgment. He didn't have, and one could argue it was because of his door, right, that all of his, I don't know, his whole sense of justice was warped. Yacholiot. So now let's take a look, right, what happens, by the way, Avram ends up by saying, Hashem, hinena ha'alti ledaber, and Hashem said, okay, if there are asarat tzadikim b'toch ha'ir, then I'll save the city. Ma she'elah po, what question do we have now?
What's the goal?
Okay, Avram walks away. I don't know if Hashem is going to save the city or not.
No, he doesn't know.
He doesn't know
until the next morning.
You know if there are 10 tzaddikim even b'toch ha'ir? No, he has no idea. And let's take a look at what happens in the story. Tem Yushkabu, remember the Malachim go to Sodom, and they are invited by Lot, Vanshei Ha'ir, Anshei Sodom, Nachsobu Alabayit, Minar V'Zaken, Kol Ha'am Mikatzeh, and then the entire people of Sodom surround Lot's home. ויקראו אל לוט ויאמרו לו איה האנשים אשר באו אליך הלילה הוציאם אלינו ונדע אותם ויצא עליהם לוט הפתחה והדלת סגר אחריו. And Lot is the one dealing with everyone.
Sani, I think one of the things that we do learn, though, is that we can, by our tefillah, we're able to influence Kodesh Baruch Hu also. In other words, the midrash about Noach not davening, Hashem said, if you had asked me to save them, I would have saved them. And when he talks to Abraham, he says, I want you to stop me from actually being able to. The same thing with Moshe Rabbeinu. You know, the Midrash says, Kodesh Baruch Hu said, I'm going to destroy the nation. And Moshe said, wait. And it was like Kodesh Baruch Hu had like sort of turned away and he turned back. In other words, he was waiting to be persuaded to do what he really wanted to do, but he needed man to help him persuade him.
Beautiful. So Becky's saying that tefillah is about persuasion.
I'm not saying only, but I'm saying.
So we're going to see it's not really. I think why. And that, by the way, I hope it's okay, Becky, that I'm saying this already now. Hashem doesn't need to be persuaded, and Hashem can't be persuaded, meaning that detracts from God, right? So what is tefillah doing? Even though we call it sometimes, right? You're not mishachnat HaKadosh Baruch Hu klum. If anything,
You're not doing the persuasion, but it's
persuading.
No, but Sonny, it's not a question of you. But it's not a question of what we're doing. It's a question of us. It's a tchuna of ourselves that we're able to see that.
That's why I'm pointing it out. Meaning Hashem is waiting to see. Do we get it? Hashem says, Avram, it's okay. It's almost as if I'm going to entertain you with your child because I love seeing how.
That's why I use the word Rachamim beforehand, because it's a Rachamim on Yitzirat Hashem.
Meaning, what's Hashem enjoying? When the Rashbam said, Hashem said, Avram has nifsvatayim hu mitaneg al tfilato. What is Hashem enjoying about this whole discussion? Avram even says, I know that he cares. Yafeh, mitzuyan. That Abraham is really learning about justice. Nachon. He's enjoying how Abraham is going out of his way for other people. Right? Don't you love that? Again, does this ever happen? When one sibling comes to defend another sibling? Love it. How often does that happen? Not a lot. But when it does, just keep going. You know, I don't care if it's true or not true. Nachon. The fact that you love your siblings so much that you're coming to defend them, like, wow, I'll do whatever you want right now. Because what? Because you appreciated that value. That value right now is more important to me than other values, right? Even that the people don't really get punished. But that's a strange thing. That after all this, we have mamash, how many is it? 9 psukim, right? Back and forth about this. Avram doesn't know what's going to be. And in the end, let's take a look. Firstly, we're going to see how significant that idea of mishpat is, because these malachim are now surrounded. They're not saying anything. Lot has to go out, try to influence them. In the end, so what does Lot propose? I have 2 daughters, asher lo yadu ish, otzia na'aten alechem, masu lahen katov beinechem, rak l'Hashem al tasu davar, ki al kein ba'u b'tzel korati. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, like malachim, you can't let this happen. Do something now. They don't do anything until a few psukim later, when atan nar'alacha mihem vayivtzeru b'ish belot, right? The people say, no, we don't want your daughters, we want you. Vayikshu ha'achad ba lagur vayishpot shafot. What did they say? You, Lot, you came to live here, and apparently he's been living there for about 25 years, right? For the time that we know Avram has been in Eretz Yisrael. Vayishpot shafot. Who do you think you are to be Mr. Mishpat? That's when vayishluchu anashim et yadam. Right, when the people accuse Lot of not knowing mishpat, which tells us that what is this whole story about? Recognizing mishpat. So does Lot know mishpat? Does he not? I don't know, but the malachim say that's enough. Right? He has a better sense of mishpat coming from Avram's house than the people of Sodom. Now, I just want to put that in just to highlight the mishpat idea. But back to Avram Avinu. Avram davens. He has no idea whether his tefillah was answered.
No, was answered, but Hashem said,
okay, I'll do what you asked.
50, okay.
But then he said, if there are 45, so he has no idea. Hashem is basically saying, if there are 10 tzaddikim, I'll save the city. It's clear that what does Abraham want?
To save the city.
To save the city, meaning he stops at 10.
There's 10 people that he doesn't know.
Nachon. And to him, though, Hashem answering his tefillah meant what? What was Avram really trying to do?
To save destruction. To
save the city from destruction. Nachon? Take a look at what happens. Even though I know exactly what Sarah's thinking, so hold that thought for a minute. Vayashkim Abraham baboker el hamakom asher amat sham et pnei Hashem. Vayashkiv al pnei stom ba'mura ve'al kol pnei eretz hakikar. Vayar v'hinei ala kitor ha'aretz ki kitor ha'kishan. Can you imagine this? The next morning, after his chutzpahdik heartfelt tefillah about self-reflection and the justice of God, Abram looks and what does he see? Destruction. In his mind, what happened? What do you think happened?
God didn't listen to his prayers.
God did not listen to his tefillah.
But God listened to his prayer.
How do you know?
No.
How do you know? That's why I said, hold that thought. Take a look at the next pasuk. Not only that, what was he asking? To save the city from destruction. He understood, though, that You don't save a city that's completely iniquitous from destruction. That's not mishpat. If there's some good inside, then that should be saved. If there are 10, it's enough to save everyone.
But obviously there weren't 10.
There weren't 10. What doesn't he know though? Take a look at the next pasuk. וישלח את לוט מתוך הפיכה בהפוך את הרים, ויזכור אלוקים את אברהם, ויהי בשחית אלוקים את ערי הכיכר אשר ישב בהן לוט. What happened? Abram doesn't know that Lot was saved, which really was, the pasuk says, an answer to Abraham's tefillah.
So he prayed for Lot.
He prayed for what? For exactly whoever is right, meaning he wanted the whole city to be saved, and the zchut of a little righteousness that was there. He understood that what's the minimal righteousness to save the entire city? 10. But if there is some righteousness, that righteousness should be saved. What he doesn't know is that there was righteousness that was saved. Who was that?
No.
He looks at stone. What does he think? Lot is dead. Nachon?
Because Lot was there.
Okay, meaning, but he doesn't just happen for Lot. He could have, if he would have said Hashem, Hashem, you know, he's my nephew. Abraham, but that's exactly it. Meaning, Hashem loved that Abraham. Meaning, if it was Lot, then you should have mentioned Lot somewhere in the tefillah. He doesn't. Not only that, the Torah though. So where comes the 50 and the 45 and the 40 and the 35 and the 30 and the 25 and the 10? Right? All of that, Hashem is just enjoying, right? And why do we have all that? If it was really about Lot, just skip to the 10, we'll get the point. No, Abram wanted to save the entire city. Now, this reminds me of so many things. I'll even start with this. Stories of, right, you wonder, right? I'm just going to give an example. I remember this. Do you remember? It was soon after we were married. It's like 1992. Nachshon Waxman, 1992. Do you remember those tefillot? I remember I was actually in Ramot at Shabbat, where he's from. I remember thinking, there's no way Hashem is going to let Nachshon Waxman be killed. Iyavshar, meaning the tefillot, they were palpable. We didn't go home to eat until 2 p.m. because everyone stayed to daven. It was just a Yom Shel Tefillah. It felt like Yom HaKippurim. Like that's it. Wow. And then not only was Nachshon Waxman killed, but
who went in there?
The other Chayal, remember, who went in, and Mama, we were actually being hosted by Shalom Rosenberg that Shabbat. He lives there also, Ramot, and he was talking about no one knew on Shabbat. This was Motzei Shabbat. And on Shabbat, he was a natig of the family. He had picked up the phone and he knew. So we found out. And he, in addition to crying with the family, he said, the mashber amunati that's going to come out of this is terrible. Because people are going to think that Hashem lo shomea tefillah. Meaning, think about this. And then, that's really going back to stone. That we were all adapting for. The same thing. But then we actually had this discussion on Shabbat about, I was telling my parents, I'm going to embarrass Bella a little, how Bella invited, my parents just made Aliyah, so she said, they should really be friendly with my mother and have them come walking on for Sudash Lishit. So I told my parents this, and they were so touched. And I said in this, you know the family, because they know Bella's aunt and uncle, Uncle Bernie. Uncle Bernie. In-laws. And my father said, he said, every time I think of Bernie Kesselman, I think of me. Because I don't even think you told me the story. My father told me the story on Shabbat. He said because Bernie Kesselman he said he's a good friend. I'm his ophthalmologist, I'm his eye doctor, and he was on his way on 9/11 to go to this building, and because of slichot, he was just a few minutes late. He actually saw the Twin Tower crash so much so that the ashes went into his eye, and he somehow, I don't know this. He somehow walked from Manhattan. How long is this? 2 hours? He crossed the bridge into Brooklyn. Thank you. I was thinking, which direction did he go in? Into Brooklyn. He took a taxi from there and then to Queens. Thank you. And then, what's the next part of the story? In that case, my father saw him soon thereafter, on that day, on 9/11, with his eyes full. He said, I don't even know how he walked. He doesn't know how he walked. And let alone get a cab and make his way back. And he spent like hours taking out the ashes from his eyes. He says, all because of a few minutes. So much so that then we spoke about how he couldn't go back to work there, the trauma, and all of his colleagues. And this was, Mamash, I heard this story for the first time on Shabbat. I'm preparing the shiur. I'm thinking, Abraham doesn't realize Shema. Hashem Shama Tefilato. Exactly, the bigger picture.
In Israel, when he was in America, my father didn't know. And we were all playing Tefilim in different houses.
I mean, B'diuk. So we think of Nachshon Waxman, and there, but maybe it could have been many, many more. Nachon, meaning we don't know. What the Torah is saying is that Hashem ken shomea tefillah. So what does that mean? Back to Becky's term. Did Abraham persuade Hashem? Had Abraham not done this, would Hashem not have saved Lot?
I don't know.
Who knows? Now, I'd love to say, so Hashem saved Lot for Abraham, but no, because even Abraham doesn't know. Meaning we don't even know the effects of our tefillah. And how the tefillah affects, it's not really about Avram's tefillah affecting Lot. It's really about Avram's tefillah affecting himself. Hashem wanted to hear how this was going to affect Abraham.
So here's the question.
Even if Abraham doesn't know what the effects are on others, it's going to have an effect on him. So and yes, will it also have an effect on others? Zebediuk. How do you know that's how I wanted to end? Zebediuk, Noach. That's exactly Noach. I'm sure Noach conversed with God, but he didn't have an effect on himself. Sarah, how do you know he didn't have an effect on himself?
Because that's exactly what Sarah said. He couldn't deal with it.
He couldn't, and he couldn't.
And that's why with the Karen, and he got drunk in his tent.
In other words, even whatever he did say to God didn't have an effect on whom? On
himself.
And therefore, it's not a tefillah. I'm sure he said things, but it wasn't really a tefillah.
שני, הוא לא הלך רחוק מדי עם זה שהוא לא יתפלל בעד עצמו, כי הוא לא יתפלל בעד עצמו עם הבקשה של הניסיון העשירי של עקדת יצחק, וגם כשהוא יצא למצרים.
That's next week.
אני חושבת שרמב"ן מבקר אותו כשהוא קיבל את הניסיון הראשון שהוא היה צריך ללכת עם הרעב ישר לרדת למצרים, הוא לא פנה לקדוש ברוך הוא ישר ירד למצרים, כלומר זה שאתה לא מבקש על עצמך זה גם בעיה. זה לא רק פתרון.
זה הנושא של שבוע הבא, where are the untold tefillot? That's next week's shiur. But you can't appreciate next week without seeing the tefillot that we do hear about. Which, by the way, what does that mean? That every tefillah that we say, does it have some effect? On whom?
On yourself.
On yourself, which thereby has an effect on, I don't want to say an effect on God, meaning God now sees that we're changed and will therefore do something, which means that the more effect it has on us, the more powerful the tefillah. So by getting up and being half asleep and davening, does it do something?
Yes.
Yes, but the more kavanah you have, everyone see that? That does something stronger. B'diuk. That's also part. There's no tefillah. Reka, let's take a look. Itmar. It says, "Zehasiyum v'sikum shalanu masach brachot." Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chinian Amar, tefillot avot tikanum. It says, I'm telling you, the avot established tefillah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, we're going to keep revisiting this part of Masach Brachot. He says, no, tefillot keneged midim tikanum. They are created based on the karbanot tamid. Tanya kavate Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, but Tanya kavate Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. We have a braita that supports both. Which braita supports the idea that tefillot keneged avot? We have a braita that says, Avram tekin tefillat shacharit. Avram taught us how to daven tefillat shacharit. He taught us the art of that prayer. How do we know? From the story of Sdom. Vayashkem Avram babuker el hamakom. And in Amida el tefillah that we know also from Tehillim, Meaning Abram goes back to Hamakom Asher Amad Sham. But again, what's the irony? We learned tefillah from the tefillah of Abram that wasn't answered. It wasn't fully answered, but it was partially answered because of the tefillah. So it chooses a tefillah. Ironically, the right obviously is the right to believe that this tefillah was answered. Even if at first glance it doesn't look like it was answered, even if one never knows if the tefillah was answered, what do we know? That were effects of this tefillah. So if
Shani, when you answer a tefillah, you can answer it positively or negatively. The tefillah is answered.
Sarah was saying,
yes, I wanted to add to that.
Ken.
I wanted to add to that Yehuda Waxman, ha'aba shel Nachshon, after the Shabbat that he was murdered, and what you said that there might be a mashber emunati.
There wasn't.
Yehuda Waxman came, and I don't know if you even remember that. Because that sometimes, not Abba, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that sometimes he says no.
That's right.
That's the.
But that Hashem is still nachon, still shomei tefillah, meaning Hashem heard it. And there were, as I said, there were effects. We don't know what the effects are. Maybe that less people, maybe more chayalim, nachon, meaning it was a surprise attack. So, more chayalim could have been killed.
So if Noach would have davened.
If Noach would have davened.
For who? Before the Mabul?
Before the Mabul.
For the Mabul. Not for his family, but for, and by the way, I'm sure he did daven for his family, but for the world, maybe there could have been some.
Or maybe his reaction would have been different, because if it says Vayashkem Avraham B'Boker here, and we say Hu Tikain Tfilat Shacharit, it means that after he asked and after he saw the destruction, he was still davening. So whatever he said.
B'diuk. So that's the shvach and the genai. Meaning lishvach, how do we still see him lishvach? Maybe his generation, exactly, maybe, and also maybe his generation was so bad that
there weren't 10 tzaddikim.
That's exactly it. In the whole world, and they are compared. Or legnai, and that
he didn't.
Why exactly? Had you davened, there would have been an effect. Maybe.
We don't know.
So we don't know, but that's where Chazal are extrapolating all different ideas. Meaning we don't know about Noach, but we definitely know about Abraham, and we're going to learn a lot about the art of tefillah from Abraham Avinu, which is going to bring us to the next week. The art of tefillah of Yitzchak Avinu, and wait a second, where are the imachot here, right? And where is Abraham when it comes to the Akedah? So I hope that you will think about these questions throughout the entire week and have meaningful tefillot. Shavua Tov.
Amen.
Shavua Tov.
That's what you said, Sarah, that the whole Bereshit is full of
Thank you.
Thank you.